talking right at the top of the hour, if that works for everybody.
Wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you again. We're really looking forward to this. I'll take us live in 3, 2, 1.
I am so excited.
Thank you, everybody that's joining us from the waiting room. We will get started right at the top of the hour. We're really excited to have you here with us today. Get started in just about 1 minute. As the waiting room lets people trickle in, we'll get started in just a minute here. Thanks for your patience with the Zoom mechanics. Okay, I see we have some other folks that will be joining us shortly. Their waiting room is letting people in slowly, but in the meantime, we'll get us started here. Thank you for joining us for the American Ambulance Association's Resilience, Addressing Race and Resiliency webinar featuring Andre Cohen of the Mayo Clinic. We appreciate your support and participation as EMS works towards a more inclusive future where our workforce more closely reflects the demographics of the communities that we serve. This is an interactive session. To ask questions of our experts, please use the Q&A function represented by the double dialog box at the bottom of your screen. The chat box, represented by a single dialog box, is where you can share peer-to-peer comments or ask for help with technological difficulties. If you have problems seeing the shared screen or hearing audio at any point throughout the webinar, please feel free to chat the moderator. With that, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Mayo Clinic Ambulance's Tom Fennell. Tom, would you please introduce Andre, talk a little bit about diversity in EMS, and kick us off?
Thank you, Amanda. I'd appreciate the opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, a colleague of mine, Andre Cohen. Andre serves as the Program Director for Mayo Clinic's Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. Mr. Cohen is well-versed in the field of affirmative action and is an effective and passionate communicator. Andre is also the project director for the Everybody In campaign at Mayo Clinic, which you're going to hear more about in just a few minutes. Andre and I are both privileged to work for an organization which is anchored in strong values and a vision to be a place of equity, inclusion, and opportunity for all. At Mayo Clinic, we need to be an agent of change to address conscious and unconscious racism throughout our organization. Earlier this summer, Mayo Clinic committed an investment of $100 million in addition to what Mayo Clinic already invests to eliminate racism and advance equity and inclusion within Mayo Clinic and improve health equity in the communities we serve and beyond. Andre was recently a guest speaker at a Mayo Clinic ambulance system-wide leadership meeting where he mentored our leaders to expand their perspective and gain a better understanding and appreciation for what makes all of us, coworkers and patients, unique and ways to communicate, understand, and be understood. Andre will share some of these messages with you today. The impact on our team was amazing. The message he delivered was impactful, and the results will be programmatic changes for our team, our leaders, our communities, and most importantly, our patients. Andre, thank you for taking time from your hectic schedule to visit with our ambulance colleagues from across the country. I'm confident they'll find your presentation enlightening, entertaining, and hopefully challenging. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Andre Cohen.
Thank you so much. I am so humbled by those dynamic and kind words. And I will say, Tom, that I do share your passion and compassion that is steeped in Mayo Clinic's values, and this is a wonderful organization. And so I'm glad that they've allowed me to be a part of this presentation today. I do want to, oh, there it is. Okay. I do want to kind of talk about some ground rules before we get into this session. And the ground rules just, I hope, or at least let me talk about myself. I use these ground rules not only for conversations like this, but almost as a mantra when I'm interacting with people in the community, both family, friends, and strangers, right? So, so we'll ask you for this particular session to be fully present. I'm sure that there are, being virtual, there are lots of things that can be distractions. If you see me looking down, I'm looking at my phone to monitor the time. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher, and so I tend to be long-winded, as he was, but be fully present. Also be respectful. And when we talk about this idea of respect, it is not only how you would like to be treated, but how you think other people might want to be treated as well, right? We'll assume benign intent. Be self-aware of your own emotions as we engage, and recognize that emotions are pieces of information that are useful for helping us make the best decisions, right? So we have to pay attention to those emotions because they can be giving us important information to help us make better decisions. Speak for yourself. Recognize that no one person is a spokesperson for a whole group of people or can give a whole perspective of, groups of people. We also ask you to approach this topic in particular with curiosity and not judgment. And curiosity, we recognize, is energizing, where judgment is oftentimes closes energy off. And then the last two things are, be respectful in your comments and engage people to continue to talk and not use words that might shut them down, right? And then lastly, maintain a sense of confidentiality. It would be really sad to see my comments or other comments taken out of context and placed in social media without even talking to me, right? So we'll maintain a sense of confidentiality. So one of the things that is a real spark for the work that we're doing at Mayo Clinic is the Everybody In campaign. And Tom talked about it a little bit, the commitment that we've made to eradicating racism. If people say, well, you can't eradicate racism, I would say that is certainly an aspiration that we have, and we have proven that other illnesses, if you will, we can actually mitigate those with some of the tools that we're thinking about in terms of being strategic in addressing racism head on. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the Everybody In campaign. So the campaign has basically 5 goals. One is recognizing our organizational goals. So Mayo's Clinic is for a more diverse and inclusive and equitable organization free of prejudice and racism. We want to reflect the diversity of our patient population, so we must work to do that. So that won't happen on its own. So we have to be proactive to do that. We also want to make sure that we're available for the underrepresented, right? And so those folks who are marginalized in society, that we want to make sure that we're available with the best resources and science that we have to help solve those health crises. We're looking at building diversity at the top, so we must make opportunities available so we can increase the proportion of women and minorities in senior leadership. What we recognize that is that in many organizations, and we'll talk about fault and responsibility a little bit later, but what we do recognize as a fact is that many of our organizations, top leadership typically happens to be male and white. in a number of categories or a number of industries across the board. And so the question is, what do we want to do about that? And we'll talk more about why we might want to take that on in just a bit. And then we want to lead in healthcare. We must own our leadership role in the healthcare industry by identifying and eliminating health disparities and promoting health equity. And so these are some of the reasons or the ways in which Mayo Clinic wants to assure that everybody is in. And so, you know, as a part of our DNA, one of the questions that we oftentimes ask, so our DNA, so to speak, is culminated in this phrase, rich ties. So we oftentimes talk about our rich ties value, and respect, integrity, compassion, healing, teamwork, innovation, excellence, and stewardship. And in many of our conversations, we ask the question, do any of these rich ties values, are they compatible, or is racism, does that fit within any of these rich ties values? Does sexism, heterosexism, does xenophobia or other isms, right? So the inability for people with disabilities to participate in our programs and services, are those isms congruent with our rich ties values? And overwhelmingly, the answer is no, they are not congruent with our rich ties values. And so when we think about, particularly in this conversation about racism, is there a reason we should not address racism? Is there a reason we shouldn't engage and try to eliminate that, in this metaphor, that illness, right? So that's something we oftentimes talk about at Mayo Clinic. And so I want to talk a little bit about this idea of resilience or resistance. Now, will people have the ability to turn on their microphones in this webinar series? Do they have that ability?
If you'd like us to, we could ask people to chat, and then we can individually unmute them if they'd like to speak. If that works for you.
Yep. So one thing I would like is, if we could type this in the chat room. If we could type in the chat room, what is resilience? So first of all, just type in the chat room what you think resilience is, or what definition do you use for the concept of resilience? So what does resilience mean to you, or how do you think about resilience? It's a comeback strength. You bounce back. That's good, Millie. Scott Moore says it's an individual's ability to rebound from adversity, the ability to withstand adversity.
Looks like David shared with us that he believes it means stamina.
Stamina. Oh, that's great as well. Stamina. The ability to keep going despite challenges. I like that, Michelle. Ron said the ability to withstand adversity. Perseverance. Is that Yoko? I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. Yoso.
Yosak, if you would like. Oh.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for clearing that up for me.
And then it looks like Roger shared with us that resilience means to him never giving up.
Never giving up. Now, here's the interesting thing. Should we, and this is a hypothetical, I mean, not a hypothetical, but this is a rhetorical question. I just want you to think about it yourself. Should we get used to bad situations, right? So I remember when I was young and I lived in an apartment, and had a really good landlord, but I didn't want to bug the landlord, right? I didn't want to bug the landlord. And there was a crack in the tile. And, every so often I'd walk barefoot and it was like some linoleum kind of thing. And either my sock or my foot sometimes would get caught in this crack. And the funny thing is, after a while, I didn't even notice the crack anymore. And so until one day, one of the maintenance guys came in, he said, "Hey, there's a crack here." I was like, "Oh yeah, I meant to talk to you guys about that." Right. So one of the things, I want us to think about is, do we need to become resilient to flawed systems? Do we need to become better adapted to flawed systems? And the flawed system that I'm referring to is like this racism. Should it get to the point, or is it at the point where it's just, well, it's going to be that way? I just have this thing going on with me. And so the next question that I have is, when does change need to happen? And I would say certainly change needs to happen when I'm no longer helpful, right? When the context that I'm working in is no longer leading me to my goals or to success. And so is it better to survive or to thrive? And I would imagine that most of us would suggest that surviving is not reaching our fullest human potential, right? And so this idea of thriving. So one of the things that I also recognize that's important is this idea of locus of control, right? And so there are tons of things outside of ourselves that we have no control over or limited influence over, right? And so what are some of those things? Type that in the chat room. What are some things that we have little control over or little influence over? What are some of those things that we have we have low influence or no influence or no control or little control? What are some of those things? The weather, that's good. Many physical appearances, yeah, right? Unless you have like lots of money, you can change anything, it seems, right? The behaviors of others, we don't have a whole lot of influence or control over other people. The way others think about us, absolutely. Others' actions, others' outside influences, family of origin, right? I did not choose my parents because I would have picked people with more money. Let's see what else. Others' actions. Cool. So I think you get that idea that there are all of these things that we have no control over, or no control, no influence, low control, low influence. And so so we have choices, right? So those outside influences can either drive our behavior, or we can operate from the circle of control. And just type in the chat room, what are some of those things that we do have control over? What are some of those things we do have control over? What do we have control over? Our behavior, our actions, ourselves, our attitudes towards others, our thoughts and our actions, our emotions. So when we let the outside world influence our circle of control, we are said to be reactive, right? Reactive. But when we operate from our circle of control, we are proactive. We are proactive. And so when it comes to thinking about the world situation, when we think about what's going on, it almost doesn't matter what happens outside of me if I am keen on my circle of control, right? And so does it matter where I grew up? It certainly does matter. But in terms of how I operate in the world, where I grew up is less important than the responsibility that I take for how I operate in the world from my circle of control. So my grandfather was, people will say, well, my grandfather was racist. That's information for you to take in, because now you have choices. My father is type 2 diabetes, and that is information for me to make some decisions around, right? So my level of exercise, the things that I need to do, and I have these predispositions, and there's some certain things that I can't necessarily avoid because of my genetic makeup, but there are certain things that I can do to stave off, that I can use as an antecedent to make sure that that I don't succumb to or I diminish my exposure to diabetes, right? And so where you come from, how you grew up, where you were raised, those things are important, but they're less important than what kind of person are you going to be. I think one of the travesties that we have in our society is that we ask young people, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And if we're in a live session, I have people raise their hand if they've heard that. But I will also tell you that I've had many jobs in my career that never existed when I was a child. So, and if you ask me that question today, I may not necessarily have a concrete answer about what I want to be when I grow up. But I do wonder if we started changing the question to what kind of person do you want to be when you grow up? And that becomes the key to establishing how I move and operate in the world, right? So thank you so much for sharing that with me. I do want to recognize some things around situational awareness, right? So I know that when I'm in my community, there's a certain kind of way that because I now live in suburbia, and I grew up in urban suburbia. It was kind of like this borderline kind of community, and so I always had to be aware of my situational awareness. So here's some thoughts around that. Keeping your head on a swivel. Has anyone ever heard people saying that, right? So you have to pay attention all the time. Watch your own six, so I have come to understand that means that you have to watch your own back. Now, it's difficult to run forward and watch your back at the same time, right? So we have that. And how long can we function in this red threat level? I would say probably not long without having some serious cognitive and post-traumatic stress exuding out of us, right? And so, but oftentimes we're put in situations where this is where we are, and in some cases it's just the reality of the space that we're in. It's the reality of the work that we do. And so if I cannot control the outside environment, what do I have control over? I do have control over myself. And so what I have to recognize is that there are three parts of my brain that are constantly working, and I have to be in control of them, right? So there's the primal brain. The primal brain is that instinctual part of our brain, the reptilian brain, so to speak, right? And this is basic survival. Fight, flight, mate, breathe. Like this is all this part of the brain is focused on. And then there's the mammalian part of the brain, which is where our emotions lie, which is where reasoning starts to begin. And it says, how do I feel about what the primal brain is pumping out? Right? So the primal brain is making these demands. The mammalian brain, the emotional brain is saying, how do I feel about that? And then lastly are executive functions. And so your executive functions say, given what my primal brain is saying, given how I feel about this thing, the emotions that are coming up, I am going to take this particular action. Now, the interesting thing, and I don't know if anybody's noticed this or seen this, but media does a really good job of poking at the primal brain, right? So I don't know, I was watching the news the other day, and they had political stuff going on, and so the newscaster was talking about how, horrible things are, or how, whatever. And then right at the commercial break, they had this commercial, and it said, do you have anxiety? Are you fearful of da-da-da-da-da? Take Prorexidrin, right? I made that up. That was just made up, right? So I'm getting all this bad news, and then I get hit with this commercial that's supposed to fix all of this anxiety that's been created in the news program. And so I actually forgot where I was going with this, but I'm going to keep going anyway. And so when we think about this idea of the emotions and our executive functions, that we have to take charge of those. Oh, that's what I was going. And so a lot of times there are, particularly in marketing, they try to hijack your primal brain. Because if you're in fear, which is where your primal brain kicks in, if you're afraid, if you're uncertain, your primal brain kicks in and makes you do irrational things like buy toilet paper because everybody else is buying toilet paper. Irrational. Right? Now, I do like a good two-ply. I will say that. I do appreciate a good two-ply. However, but we saw those kinds of behaviors happening right before our eyes, and many of us are like, what's the big deal? And I bet some of you, like me, bought extra toilet paper just because other people were buying extra toilet paper, and you didn't want to miss out. Okay, maybe that was just me. But we have to be responsible. We have to not let our primal brain take control. And I would say this is where kind of the unconscious racism or stereotypes that we have people, I think this is one of those places that lives. I think it's fueled by the emotions, and unfortunately it comes out in these in our executive functions. But so how do we take control of that? How do we take control of that? So one of the ways we do this is through a cognitive process. And I like this term, cognitive control. Cognitive control. And so I don't know about you, if your fear is, big hairy spiders or snakes or mice. My thing is mice. And I'm not afraid of a mouse. The small mammal, right? Because I'm bigger than it. But it's the scurrying of the mouse that like unnerves me. I'm like, right? And so, but I can't let my fear overtake my responsibilities, right? So if I'm in I'm in an executive team meeting, and the presidents of, these organizations are sitting here, and a mouse comes into the room, I cannot just jump up on the table and scream like I would naturally do. Right? I can't do that. So I take cognitive control. And so I start having self-talk. I start thinking about what things can I do to distance myself from my piece of distress, right? And then I start thinking about what are the possible benefits that I can get if I overcome that fear. So I do all of this processing because I do not want my primal brain to have me make decisions or act in ways that are incongruent with my values, right? And so values become not only the central point, but they become the wall that we push off from, right? And so this cognitive control is this process of thinking about my thinking, using my metacognition to think about it. So I've been having these conversations with my friends, and the George Floyd incident was a really bad incident, and since then there have been a number of incidences involving unarmed Black men in a number of different situations, right? Being killed, and so I started thinking, and I wonder if racism is almost too simple, and I don't want to say that it's not racism, but I wonder if it's if racism is just the shorthand for something that is more impactful, something that we should be thinking about more strategically. What if it's not just racism? Right. And the funny thing about, racism is I'm not really sure how to help somebody who doesn't A, think that they're racist, or B, doesn't want to change what they're doing. Right. So I don't know that I can help those people. But I do have some questions about how this might be different. So this is what I know about. So I worked at Anoka County and had a really good relationship with the sheriff, who at that time wasn't the sheriff. He was the deputy sheriff, but now he's the sheriff, and he is a really good friend of mine. And for those of you who don't know, Anoka County is, so if they're like rings to suburban metro areas, so let's say Minneapolis-St. Paul is the center of the urban areas. Anoka County, that would be like the first ring outside of the major metropolitan area, right? So some parts are urban, a bit urban, and then other parts are suburban, and then other parts are rural. So it's kind of a big space. And so what I know about the process, and I've talked with the sheriff about this, I've talked with other law enforcement officers about this, and I know you all are not law enforcement officers per se, but as first responders, you kind of get lumped into the whole gambit, right? So in a lot of cases, people don't necessarily see the difference between your badge and your uniform and other first responders. So at any rate, one of the things that I recognize is the training regimen, right? And how those things go. And so people spend all this time in training and in development. And I appreciate that. Yes, thank you for giving me the demographics of Anoka County. And so Sheriff Stewart and I were talking one day, and we were talking about the regimen of training. And one of the things that I recognized in our training was that the night shifts were the hardest shifts. I mean, the stories that people would tell about what happened in those night shifts, and in my investigation with law enforcement across the board, is what I found is that we have some really interesting practices, that the youngest people, the newest people to the organization, oftentimes get the toughest shifts. Right. So there were a lot of officers who were new that ended up on these night shifts, and it would just be some of the zaniest stuff, the stories I would hear of what would happen, and that the goal in some ways were for the folks who had higher skills, more seasoned. They would want to work the easier shifts. The same thing happened in the classroom, right? So part of so I taught middle school, and I would have stayed in middle school if we had a different way of thinking about education, right? So to make more money, to rise in a school district, I had to leave the thing that I was good at doing to do something that I wasn't as good at to get more money. So I had to leave the classroom to go into administration to make more to make more money. And I think that's very interesting. And so I wonder what happens when we have people who are individuals who are in these really tough situations, who may not necessarily have the skills or are developing the skills. They are developing the skills to deal with these really hard things. I wonder what that does to someone day after day. And I wonder if our enemy isn't so much racism as much as it is cynicism. Cynicism. I wonder what role cynicism plays. I'm just going to check the chat room really quick. Yes, please. Roger, please. I'm open to a question. Oh, so I have to unmute him. Let's see. Let me see if I can find you. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to find Roger to unmute him. So let's see.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Okay. So I accidentally raised my hand, but I do have a question.
Yes, please.
And that is pertaining to the topic and now that you just said about the night shift and the more senior individuals working the less stressful shift. And I completely get what you're saying, and some of that surrounds around seniority and individuals wanting to think that they already did their time, and now it's your time to actually prove yourself. Is kind of the mentality around that. However, the racism and the cynicism part is the question I have here. How do we separate the two when it's all hate?
That is a really good question, Roger. And I would say that I don't even believe that it's hate. But I'll show you, I'm going to show you in just a second, really what I think about the cynicism, right? And so I'm going to skip this activity and go straight to that. I'm going to come back to, here we go. I'll come back to those activities in just a second, because I want to talk directly to your point, Roger. And I would say that it takes a discerning mind to be able to separate those two, right? That racism could be the side effect of something else, right? So when we look at this model of the emotional kind of spectrum, I think that it's interesting that between trust and surprise is this idea of curiosity, right? But curiosity is also the shadow of that is fear. But if we go all the way across from curiosity and go directly across, what do we run into? Cynicism, right? So what is what is cynicism? Type in the chat room what you think cynicism is. What is cynicism? It is distrust. It's a know-it-all, snarky. It's a doubt. Skepticism. Believing people only care about themselves, being motivated only by self-interest, right? So when we get to this part of cynicism, now, as first responders, part of what you see on a regular basis is often not the best that we have to offer as human beings. Nobody calls first responders for situations that they have control over. They typically call because they don't have control over it. They're things are out of control, right? And so we oftentimes see all of those things. And if we don't, and this goes right to Roger's point, how do we separate racism from cynicism from hate? Well, if we look at the larger circle connected to cynicism is anger. So all of these things, all of your answers are correct. In the chat room, you're absolutely right. Those are all parts of or features of cynicism, which is rooted in this kind of anger, because either the social contract has been broken, a moral code has been violated, and we see this over and over and over again. And what I would say is, if we don't check our cynicism, it becomes contempt. It becomes contempt if we don't check it. So what do I mean by that? What is contempt? What is contempt? How would you define contempt? Snobbery? A lack of concern for others? Disdain? I like that. I'm going to write that down. Disdain. It was on there twice. Beneath consideration. Lack of value or valid. Their concerns aren't even valid. I have disdain for them. I'm being unfeeling. I don't even feel for them anymore. Does that sound like a rationalization for some of the racial incidences that we've seen? Could that be something that explains that? And is there something we can do about that? I mentioned earlier that I don't know what to do, how to help people with racism, right? So but I can help them with cynicism. Right? So what can get us out of this contempt? What can get us out of the cynicism? What can get us out of this anger is making sure that we have a full cup. Making sure we have a full cup. I'll never forget, I was working with a social work group, and a lady stood up and she was crying. I was doing a diversity presentation and she was crying. And she said, I don't know how to keep being a social worker. I have families that don't have food to eat, and their children are, in bad situations. And my husband wants to go out to dinner. And I'm like, how can I go to dinner when there are these people who have this stuff? And so she said, what do I do? I said, ma'am, go to dinner with your husband. Have dessert with your husband. Go dancing, take long walks, do whatever you do with your family, with your intimate partner, so that you are full when it comes time to give to other people. So I wonder how much work-life balance these officers have had. How long have they been working too long shifts? How long have they not made a shift off of the bad shift to the good shift? And are we doing this stuff because of seniority? Because that sounds like my household. My dad said, you get this because you're the oldest. But if I'm not performing, what good does it do me to be the oldest if I can't do things, right? And so if we're doing things off of seniority, is seniority getting us the results that we want? And I would suggest that these are the things, the cognitive processes that we need to engage in so that we are being effective, so that we're being effective. Because I believe the cynicism is what's really hurting us. So here are some truths about human beings. Human beings can learn, change, and grow. Truism, right? Even if we can't see the evidence of it, we know that it can happen. This, if we can remember this helps stave off cynicism. Okay, they didn't get it this time, but maybe they can get it next time. I know that we all have experienced repeat offenders, right? Or repeat calls. And you're like, well, they get it this time. The funny thing is, I'm sure that you've had a behavior that adults in your life were like, I wish they would break this behavior. And you did on your time, not necessarily theirs, right? The most frustrating part about being a middle school teacher was having unrealistic expectations that my students didn't share, that they didn't share, right? And we also have to recognize that people do what they think works even when it doesn't work, when it's not effective. And so our job is to help them see that it wasn't effective. Because until they have that realization, they'll continue doing that. And if we have different expectations for them, or we can't see that from their purview, then that becomes the root of cynicism. And we also must recognize that all human behavior is goal-directed. And so the question then becomes, what is the goal of the behavior? If I want to be effective, I'm going to ask, what is the goal of that particular set of behaviors? And lastly, recognizing that attitude is a reaction to goal accomplishment. So when I approach someone who has not met their goals, they are going to have a bad attitude. And so that attitude, so then if I want to help them, then I must figure out what is the goal of their behavior, what's the goal of their what are they trying to do? And once I help them get that, they have a good attitude or good behavior, right? And so these will allow us to short circuit some of those and stave off that cynicism. And what are the goals of human behavior? We're all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Significance says that I'm a person with purpose and power, that I can do something, that I can be actionable. Belonging says that I can be in relationships with people who I can I can feel connected to, who understand my significance. And safety simply says that I'm physically, mentally, spiritually, and intellectually safe to be in relationships with people who understand my significance, right? That understand my significance. So when we think about this idea of staving off cynicism, we think about this idea that maybe the roots of racism is a little bit different. I come to these plants because sometimes people will say, well, I want to take a shortcut. The shortcut I want to take is I'm going to treat everybody the same. I just want to treat everybody the same. And that's what they said. And they said, be colorblind. I'm going to be colorblind. I'm not going to see color, right? That's what people say. But let's see how that works in the garden. So if I water all of these plants the same, so one is a fern, one is a cactus, and one is a bonsai. If I water all of these plants the same, what kind of results will I get? So type that in the chat room. What kind of, if I treated watered these the same, I gave them the same amount of sun, I treated them the same, type in the chat room, what kind of results do you think I'll get from that? So 2 of them will die. It'll be disastrous. Yeah, right? Yeah, people I just saw the comment in the chat room that people are responding to the fact that the cynicism could be driving these racist behaviors. So I'm glad I made that case. But the more important case is the one that we're making right now, which is what do you do about that, right? So no, I can't treat everybody the same, because they're not the same. They don't need the same things. But what I can do is treat them equitably and say, these are the processes that we will undertake to make sure that you get the best services that you can. And so my plants can't tell me, they can't talk to me about their about what's going on with them, right? And so how do I know that my fern is not getting what it needs? How do I know that? It starts to turn yellow, right? It starts to wither. It starts to not be its fullest self. So to see that, I have to be in relationship with my fern. I have to watch the fern. I have to feed the fern. I've got to learn and read about ferns so that when I interact with the fern, I treat the fern the way it needs to be treated so that it can thrive, not just survive. Because we said that before, right? That we want to move from surviving to thriving. So if this fern is going to thrive, then I've got to know, I've got to be the actor to make sure that I'm giving the fern what it needs. And I do that through the relationships that I have, right? Platinum rule versus the golden rule. We'll talk more about that in just a second. The last thing I'd like to leave you with as we start to kind of look at winding up our time is the 4 agreements, right? So first, be impeccable with your word. Do not take anything personally. Recognize that the people that we're engaging, that we're talking with, are out of sorts in a number of ways, right? We're not seeing them at their best. We're not seeing them with their prefrontal cortex or that executive functioning in full effect. We're probably dealing with the primal brain, if not the mammalian brain, which is where those emotions sit. So don't take these things personally. Don't make assumptions about other folks, and always do your best. There was one though that I wanted to, I think I skipped it because I was excited. This. And so as we kind of wind down this conversation, I want to give you this allegory, and I want you to help me with this allegory, right? So I used to drive a 85 Honda Civic, and there was one thing that was missing in my Honda Civic, and can anybody guess what that might have been? The thing that might have been missing in my Honda Civic? It was a cup holder, right? And it was how'd you know? It was missing in my Honda Civic, so I didn't have a cup holder. So it was also a standard transmission vehicle, so I needed both feet and hands. I'm not sure what's going on. I needed both feet and hands to drive this thing. I also did not have one of those travel mugs, so I just had a regular coffee mug. And one of the things and I also lived 2 blocks away from work. And so back in those days, gas was 85 cents a gallon. So I drove to work every day. And so I would also leave like 5 minutes, 10 minutes before I was supposed to be there, because I had an unofficial official parking space. But from time to time, somebody would have parked in my unofficial official parking space. And so I had to find another parking space. And so now I'm running late. So I'm doing all of this jostling around with my standard transmission car, with the stick and the wheel and the pedals and the stuff. And I'm trying to drink my coffee. And what is happening to my coffee? What's happening to my coffee? It's sloshing around. It's spilling. Now, I will tell you that this happened over and over again until I figured out what was going on with me. And this is what I came to. Because I kept asking, why is my coffee spilling? And when I figured it out, it changed my whole outlook on life. My coffee was spilling because that's what was in my cup. That's what was in my cup. If water had been in my cup, what would have spilled out? Well, water would have spilled out of my cup, right? And so, what's the moral? What's the lesson, Andre? It's important to know what you put in your cup, because whatever is in your cup is going to spill out. So when you're in a hurry, what spills out? When you're under stress, what spills out? When you don't have enough resources to get a job done, what spills out? When somebody cuts you off on the road, what spills out? And I would suggest that we want to make sure that our intentions and our behaviors are aligned with our values, right? And so I want my values to spill out, which means I got to keep filling my cup with positive stuff to stave off cynicism, to chase away racism. I have to continually remind myself that people are doing the best they can with what they have, and it's going to be inadequate for the challenges that we currently face. I have to keep reminding myself that. I keep having to remind myself that as a human being, there are no disposable people. What is in a hole that's 3 feet deep? Nothing. And so it is our job to fill that stuff, because if we don't, the universe will fill it with trash, with Cheetos wrappers and cans and all sorts of stuff, when it should be filled with asphalt, right? When it should be filled with purpose. Just want to make sure that I hit all my major points. We kind of talked about those things. So this is the last thing I'll leave you with are the 6 steps for speaking up against everyday bigotry, right? And even when that's happening in your head, to do this. So be prepared. Recognize that we will all make mistakes, and the mistakes that we make will come back to us to ask us if we've learned anything. So you'll have another chance, right? When you're dealing with people, identify their behaviors. There's an old adage, love the sinner, hate the sin, that kind of thing. Appeal to principles, set limits, be an ally and find an ally. And lastly, be vigilant, right? Lastly, be vigilant. And so what I'd like to do is, just open up the floor for some questions and comments. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andre. This has been an incredibly engaging session. We don't usually have anywhere near this much chat traffic. We did get a question come in. Should you call people out on cynicism directly? Or is it better to instead encourage them to take care of themselves to refill their cup?
So all situations are, there are nuances to those, right? So do you have a relationship with this person? Are you vested in this person's growth and development? All of those things will play a role in that. Typically, I encourage people to, this is what I will say. Whatever you do, encourage someone to analyze their own growth and development, right? So I have not found it helpful ever to tell somebody what to do, but actually to help them discover what they should do oftentimes is more effective, at least for me. And that's for people that I have relationships with, as well as people I don't have relationships with. If I can get them to think about their behavior, their goals, and that kind of thing, I found that to be helpful. So how do you control situations when cynicism is rampant from the top down? So that's a really good question. So when it becomes an organizational alignment kind of thing, one is, first you have to analyze and say, what does it cost me to be a part of this organization? And can I change it? The other thing is, I think oftentimes people don't recognize that they're even in a cycle of cynicism, which is why the goals and values of an organization are important. And I would say if we can bring people back to focusing on those things, and the more we focus on those things, cynicism can't stay around when we're focused on that. So even from the top down, I would say go back to values to help drive and clarify what we're doing in the first place. Are there a few examples of values that you or Mayo find effective in reducing racism? I would say as the concert of all of them, right? And it's not unique. It's not unique to Mayo. I think it's having values and holding people accountable to those values that actually is the process of staving off the cynicism, not necessarily what the values are, right? I think it's the process of having them, having everyone understand what they are and moving towards those, as opposed to the splintering effects that cynicism and racism oftentimes can have. These are great questions.
Okay, it looks like we have arrived almost at the top of the hour. Again, Andre, we have been so incredibly grateful for your time and thought and insights today. Tom, before we sign off, did you have any closing comments?
You know, I too would like to thank Andre for venturing into this world of EMS. He really gave us a lot to think about when he presented to our group, and hopefully he has done the same to this larger group from representatives from across the country. Andre, thank you for sharing your message. We certainly look forward to hearing more from you in time, and you and I will continue to communicate on some things that you know that I'm working on within our organization as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm humbled, and I hope that you have some things that can help you as individuals in your organization. So thank you.
Thank you again, Andre and Tom. This has been absolutely phenomenal. To everyone that is calling, texting, and emailing me, the recording for this session will be will be included in tomorrow's Daily Digest so that you can play it back to watch it again, as well as share it with your colleagues. So thank you again to our participants, to Andre Cohen and Tom Fennell from Mayo Clinic, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Thank you again.